Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Donnelly, Director of Webinars for Tech Channel, and I'd like to welcome you to our presentation, How to Securely Deploy ACS and Use Encrypted Sessions. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but feel free to ask a question or submit a comment at any time during the event by entering it into the Q&A panel. If you experience technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel to alert us, and someone will assist you. You may download a PDF version of today's slide deck by clicking on the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources and clicking on the slide deck. You'll find that on the left side of your screen, and know that you can download those right from the platform without being disconnected from the webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Fortra. Our featured speakers today are Amy Williams and Steve Sisk, Principal Security Services Consultants at Fortra. Amy joined Fortra in 2015. She holds CISSP, CISA, and PCIP certifications. Amy's worked on the IBMI platform for nearly 30 years, and her experience includes application testing, system installations, system administration, and architecture. Steve has engineered and administered IBMI power systems and predecessors for more than 26 years in single entity and multi-entity environments. And with that, Amy, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much, Janine. So today, we're really excited to talk to everybody. We get these questions a lot about securing ACS and being able to deploy it. So we're going to talk about why encrypted sessions are important and to get off that open port 23. We're going to give you a little overview of what SSL and TLS provide for you. We're going to give you also an insight into using the IBMI to actually be your certificate authority using the digital certificate manager that comes with the system itself. When configuring ACS or access client solutions to accept and request that secure communication. And then how you can securely deploy ACS in a secure configuration and be able to have a consistent configuration across your enterprise. So today we wanted to get started with a quick poll, and with that we're going to share the results. So when we're talking about ACS, we want to know what your top challenges really is. So Steve, I know we get these questions a lot. Regarding the top challenges some people have managing ACS. So other than the options that we've given, are there any other top ones that come to mind to you?
Steve, are you on mute?
No, I'm not. I don't think I am.
Okay, no, you're not. Thanks, Steve.
Mostly it centers around managing certificates and distributing and managing the product on the desktops. So we talk about in one of our other webinars more about the management side of deploying ACS in the enterprise
Does more
environment.
of a deep dive. Yeah, so, and I believe at the end of the presentation, we've got some links to some longer form webinars about the same content that we're going to have today. So today's going to be a little bit of a quick fire, but I think...
yeah, Amy, I think we've got results here that I'll go ahead and launch to the audience.
Super. So it looks like right now deploying those updated configurations is the top challenge, which... Again, that's that desktop management Steve was mentioning. The restricting of the functions So we'll touch, I think we might touch on that today, but it might not. We don't go into depth, I know. And then certainly managing certificates will give an overview of that. So this is really typical of what we see and what we hear from everyone when we're talking to them about getting ACS into the environment if they haven't upgraded to it or moved off of something that hasn't been supported for, is it 6 years, 8 years now, Steve, that the client access for Windows hasn't been supported?
Right. Yep. Since 7.1 was decommissioned, so been a while.
Yeah. So I think with that we can dive in. So why do we care about encrypted sessions? It's really about protecting your data and ensuring that even internally on your internal network, all of the data that's flowing over the wires is encrypted and not just in plain text. When you're connecting with ACS, you're passing your user IDs and your passwords. And we have seen more and more the breaches that are happening because of compromised credentials. Whether these are through phishing attacks or somebody has gotten a sniffer on a network and been able to collect those credentials, identity theft and identity theft counts as your user ID and password. They're able to impersonate you on the system and use those credentials possibly for data theft, for changing data. And there's many regulatory bodies that actually require this now. So this is becoming more and more a requirement and less just a best practice. So when we talk about the configuration, there's not just one place that you have to do the configuration. So it is a conversation between the server, your IBMI, and the client, whether that client be ACS or be a Windows server, regardless of what's communicating to your IBMI. You have to have the pieces configured in both places to be able to have a successful secure communication active. And when we look at that end-to-end encryption, the first thing that we're going to want to do is have that server configured and able to present that secure communication. When the end-to-end communication happens, the first thing that happens, and this is a high level, so we're going to go through this quickly. There's deeper dives and all kinds of charts out there for you. But the client's going to ask for that encrypted session. So we've got their client configured that it wants to use an encrypted session. When it hits that server, the server is either going to say, yep, I can do that. And when it says it can, it's going to provide what that list of ciphers and protocols are. When it comes back with that, the client's going to verify that that certificate, which we're going to talk about certificates, that the client actually trusts that certificate. And that's where the certificate authority comes in. So that certificate authority is that signing agent, that you trust that whoever signed that certificate is truly who they are and that the server is actually who you think it is. So once it says it trusts it, that client generates the session key and the session is started, and now you're communicating securely. No more clear text. Now, there is a slight difference in the order of operations here with TLS 1.3 with the expectation that it will be faster. But this is, in general, the way an encrypted session is going to be established. So when we talk about certificates, so Steve, if you want to kind of dive into this about what the certificates really provide for those encrypted sessions.
Yeah, sure. So the certificate is the foundational element for establishing the secure communications with the IBMI. And the exchange that Amy mentioned before is a way to validate that the client and the server are both in agreement that they trust each other. The certificates can be issued by a CA. There's 3 different kinds. There's the well-known, like GoDaddy and GeoTrust and different ones like that. There's internal. Some companies have their own internal CA where they generate certificates for the enterprise. And of course, you can generate or create a certificate authority on the IBMI itself. There's all the certificates have a validity period, and that's one of the elements that, as system administrators, that we have to be on our toes about, because there was a recent change in the industry where certificates issued by CAs have a 13-month lifespan, so no more 3 or 4 or 5 year certificates. So we have to be on our toes about that. And also the certificate components determine what encryption can be used on the connection itself.
And there's certainly a number of choices on that. So if you want to keep going on the history, this is my favorite part, is realizing how old some of these protocols are.
Right. I still remember in the days when SSL v2 and SSL v3 were fairly popular. But you can see there's a long history of TLS SSL protocols. And it's interesting that that one of the ones that we consider to be strong was developed way back in 2008. Mm-hmm. So it's, what was that, 15 years ago? I'm doing a quick math.
Oh, no math today. Come on now. That's just,
and of course,
that's cheating.
TLS 1.3 is becoming more pervasive and popular in the in configurations, because especially in web environments, because of the speed factor. So here's the protocols that are supported by release, and in the SSL PCL value, there's a special value *OPSIS, and the values that are in yellow here are the protocols that are populated in QSSL PCL when you choose OPSIS. And you'll notice in V7R4 and V7R5 that there are no longer any weak protocols being specified in that system value.
Yeah, and certainly when we move to TLS 1.3, the cipher suites become very specific, which is what we're going to touch on next. So those cipher suites, which ensure that our communications are encrypted at the strongest level, these are those algorithms that are being used. So the QSSL, CSL, CTL, right? So the SSL control is the one that's going to set your cipher list. Now, there's 2 pieces to this, because you not only have the option to set it to OPSIS, so you're using those default ciphers that IBM has provided with the PTFs, but you can also override that using user-defined, and then you can edit the actual list of ciphers. So that's cipher list. And when we look at the cipher list and what's supported, the cipher suites today, they're enabled by default at 7.4 and 7.5, is a fairly short list. I think there's 9. You'll notice on the chart to the right, TLS 1.3 only supports the top 3 most stringent and strong ciphers. And then TLS 1.2 supports the other ciphers. TLS 1.1 and 1.0 do not support any of the currently supported, or sorry, not supported, but not deprecated ciphers. All of the other ciphers have been deprecated and been found to be weak. So when we get into configuring the server, right? So now we know that we need to do it. We know that there's stronger ciphers we need to use. Let's actually get our server configured. So DCM comes with the IBMI. It's not something you have to install. It's not something extra. It's built into the system. And this will allow you to manage certificates both for your web servers, for other applications you might be running on your IBMI, but also for your secure communications, telnet, file server, ODBC, JDBC configurations. So to get to DCM, we're going to go to Navigator on port 2006/DCM. They've made that a lot easier today than it used to be. And then we make that decision, right? So Steve talked about there's those trusted certificate authorities like DigiCert or GeoTrust, or you can do a self-signed where the IBMI is your CA. So that's the config that we're going to go through today. So when we are configuring the certificate authority, the first thing we actually have to do is have somewhere to store these certificates. So we have to create that certificate store. So the first store we'll create is our local CA store. When you create the store, you do have to have a password that's going to encrypt the store. And then when we complete that process, we're going to create a new certificate. We are going to fill out all of the relevant information, including what cipher and what strength we want that certificate authority to be at. Once we've created it, we should get a green box saying, yay, it worked. Now we can actually create a certificate signed by that CA. So we'll now create our system store. We'll create that new certificate using a local CA, not an internet CA. So those well-known CAs are those that are considered internet CAs. And then once it's signed and you have a certificate, we get to assign it to all the servers. Now there is an option now to be able to have multiple certificates on these servers. So you can add certificates, or when that expiration, that 13 months is up, you can replace the certificate with the newer certificate. So since we don't have a cert yet on these servers, we're going to add the first time around. After that, we're likely going to be replacing those certificates. So this handles the database servers, Telnet, the sign-on server, DDM, all of the host servers. But I did mention web servers. So there's another piece when you are configuring the HTTP web instances. We have to have an application to actually assign the certificate to. So in DCM, if you go to Manage Application Definitions and you don't see your web server application there, you can, through the web administration, actually create an application definition from the admin page. And then once that definition is there, it's just like assigning the certificate to any of the other servers. You'll assign the certificate, you'll stop the server for the web services and restart it, and then you will have that secured port available to have that HTTPS part so that it's secure now on the web. So when we talk about Telnet, right, we're talking today about ACS, Access Client Solutions, and requesting that encrypted session, right? So this is where our client is going to request that session from the server. So from the system configurations, we're going to choose the system that we want to configure. We're going to select Use SSL for that connection. When you verify the connection, if you have not downloaded the CA or you're not using a well-known CA, you're going to be prompted to add it to your certificate store. So that's the prompt on the right-hand side of this slide, is accepting that CA, that yes, I trust this certificate. I'm going to trust any certificate signed by that certificate authority. Once that is done, you'll want to set the default communications to SSL. So now that all the communications from that client will use those secure protocols and hit the secure ports. When we're only going to configure Telnet, that's going to be from within the session, and you can set it for Telnet SSL or to use the default from the system configuration. To verify you're actually using a secure session, at the very bottom of your session, you're going to see hopefully a lock that either is at 128, which is going to be some of the older protocols, or 256 if you've set a stronger protocol in Cipher. And then when you click on that lock, it will actually show you the details of the certificate that has signed that server, so you can verify it. And I know through a few audits, this is now starting to be required. Screenshot where they're asking what encryption level, what ciphers you're using, what protocols you're using to actually encrypt the sessions to the systems. And then verifying that ODBC is actually using that secure, you're going to see a different job. So many of us are familiar with the QZDASO INIT. Well, that's the open, unencrypted, everything's in the clear. When you're using the encrypted sessions, it's going to replace that O with an S. So that's going to be a secure session. And you can see that in the job at the very bottom of these connection windows. So that's how you can verify that this is all actually happening. So I promised you some links. So there are some more information about how to get started with DCM. They have changed the interface quite a bit if you haven't done that recently. And then some really good FAQs about how-tos. So with that, we do have another polling question. Get your thoughts on one more thing. So this is going to be if you have configured ACS yet to use secure communications and where you really are in that journey. So Steve, I know I just ran into it last week where a customer didn't know that this was something that they really needed to be looking at.
Wow.
Have you had, yeah. Right?
Yeah, I mean, in today's world, encrypting even internal communications, it should be a standard business practice. The insider threat to an organization is a very real, potentially a very real risk to organizations. And the statistics are quite high that an internal breach will occur from a person inside the organization.
Yeah, and I know 15 years ago, and I was working for a CIO that was much more forward-thinking than I realized at the time, wanted all of our internal communications to be encrypted, server to server, everything. And this was beyond IBMI. They wanted everything encrypted internally. And I thought, that's just ridiculous. We're inside. We're in our own network. But now you're never just in your own network. No matter how isolated you've got it, no matter how segmented you've got it, you've got to make those windows of risk as small as possible. So I think we've got a good set of answers. If we can bring those up. And it looks like
Amy. I did launch those, just so you know.
Oh, beautiful. It looks like a lot of you haven't had the chance to address this yet, and we get it, right? Some of you have done Telnet only, and certainly there are more steps that we're not going to have time to cover today about getting all of the servers communicating, but I think when we go into this next section, Steve, about that secure deployment of ACS, we're going to answer a number of those questions that I think people have often about how hard is it to get this going. So let's jump in to the deep end now.
Okay, so we're going to have a brief discussion on securely deploying ACS, and that would mean not the transport method, but getting installed on the desktop so that the users have the functions that you want them to have, and they can't change those. ACS uses a different technology. It's Java-based, whereas the old IBM Access for Windows was a true Windows application. The product is readily available for download by anyone with an IBM ID. And the components that are installed during the installation process don't necessarily control what functions can be exercised by the user. And users can change the configuration file that has some control over what functions they have. And the product can be updated without a traditional Windows install. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few moments. So there's three types of deployments that you can have with SSO. SSO. I got SSO on the brain. With ACS, one's desktop.
Muscle memory, Steve. It's okay. I get it.
Yeah. Server and USB, and we're just going to cover the desktop today. So with the desktop, product and user-specific files are installed on the desktop. There's the default locations for the install if you don't specify any special parameters or use the all-user function. The preferred product location for ease of management is in the public directory within users. And the reason being is if it's installed in the users for each user in that directory, then you have to traverse those directories to find the instances when you want to do an update. And so it's much easier to know where that software is installed. And with ACS, there's two products on the Windows desktop. And one is the Java-based application that we just talked about, and the other is the Windows application package, which has native APIs for Windows as well as ODBC and OLA interfaces for database access. So you can do the install by running the JavaScript for the correct bitness, and again specify that all user, and it will put it in the public directory for you. So the security challenges depicted here on this particular screen, on this particular chart. So when we go through the install process of the JavaScript, what we choose doesn't necessarily prevent the user from accessing any of those things we don't choose. And all of that configuration that's specified during the install process is in a user accessible path in the ACS config.properties file. And here we got a couple of snippets. One is with a user that's allowed to do three things: 5250, data transfer, and spool files. Look at printed output. And all the user has to do is go into this ACS config.properties file and remove the values after the equal sign, and they have access to all the functions. But there's other ways that can be this can be circumvented, in that I can download a version. I can download a new version or file of ACS, I can unzip it, and without doing anything, I can run it. And it doesn't use a Windows installer, so the traditional prohibitions on users installing software isn't in effect. And I just mentioned about the product being functional.
Right. Well, and we can just run it right from that jar file without ever running the executable install, right?
Right. Exactly. I just got to all I have to do is unzip the zip file that comes from IBM and go in and click on either an executable or the jar file, and I have a fully functioning product.
So that could bypass any of the configs you think that you've put in place, which I think is what you're talking about next.
Yes. Right. So the way to control what users have access to as far as functions within ACS is to use registry keys. And you get to this particular set of options by launching ACS as a Windows administrator. And you go into the Preferences tab, and you'll see a new tab called Restrictions that's not there if you launch it just as a user. And this is an excerpt. It's quite a long list of functions that you can choose. But the way this works is the items that you don't want the user to have access to, you select those, and then you click Apply, and then the Export Reg file, and it will actually export a registry file that allows you to run that registry file on the desktop. Of course, just a tidbit here, before you hit OK, uncheck the boxes and hit Apply again, then OK.
So with this method, Steve, could we create multiple different versions of that reg file for different functions, or do we have to, end it and restart it every time we want to create a new reg file?
No. In this particular interface, you can select a set of what you want for a set of users, hit the apply export reg file, then go in and change the selections again, apply export reg file. So you can do that over and over again. Now, what this using registry keys has an administrative benefit in that the functions that are available to a user can be changed simply by pushing a reg file to the desktop and running it. No configuration changes have to be made inside the product. So many of our customers take advantage of this, and they build a set of reg files for the different function combinations that they want to have available to their users, and they will push that reg file down to the desktop and affect the function availability changes through those reg files. And so if somebody needs more or less in the future, again, the help desk can just push that reg file down to the desktop and run it.
And these restrictions, these are actually in place regardless of if I'm running it from the public install folder, if each individual user's installed it, or I've just downloaded the product from the IBM site and unzipped it and run it from there.
Correct. Yeah, that's the beauty of these using the registry files is no matter where ACS is launched from, the controls will still be in place. Whereas with the config.properties file, ACS config.properties file, it's only going to be in effect if ACS is launched from that directory path. So if I download the zip file and I unzip it, and I run it from that folder where I just unzipped the zip file, then it's going to use the ACS config.properties file that's included in that pathing. So registry keys have that extra layer of security that no matter where the user exercises that product from, they're still going to experience the same restrictions.
So this takes care of that functionality piece. So I know the other challenge is always how do I make sure all of my users are connecting securely?
Right. Yep. So the ACS, the Java portion of the product, has a certificate file. And one of the things as an administrator is that I want to make it easy to get the certificates in the user's hands, and I don't necessarily want to have them answer the certificate acceptance dialog, because often that can generate a significant number of calls into the help desk. So as an alternate means of getting certificates on the desktop, the IBMI administrator, whomever, can on their version of on their version of ACS on their desktop, they can ensure that all the correct CAs are in this certificate store, and then it can be pushed out to the desktops. Now, we recommend two particular items here. One is that the certificate store be placed in a common location in a read-only path that allows the users to use the certificates in the certificate store, but prevents them from modifying it. And then where you have a desktop that has multiple users on it, specifying in the ACS config.properties file a path for the certificate store enables all users on that desktop to leverage that same certificate store. So the normal location for the certificate store is in each user's documents directory. So should you need to push out new certificates or update certificates, this gives you a streamlined way of knowing exactly where that certificate store is when you push out the new certificates. So then on the ACS Windows application package, it has two files that makes up its certificate store. And those certificates are pushed, if you will, through the normal certificate key management interface that's in the ACS, the main window there. But the way that they're pushed to the certificate store that's a part of the Windows application package is through the push to Windows button there in that interface. So the way to make all those certificates available in the Windows application, for example, for ODBC, if you want to encrypt that, we'd encourage you to do that, is you select those certificates and you hit that push to Windows, and it will populate those. Now, again, same technique can be used with this particular certificate store. The administrator can put all the correct certificates in there, and it can be pushed to the desktop just as the CA certs file for the Java ACS application. Now, we added some. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Amy.
Oh, I was just going to say, so the Windows application package is really the replacement for the old ODBC drivers from the client access Windows that came with that ODBC install, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things is that there's not a direct interface to view the contents of this certificate store for the Windows application package. So what we've included here is the commands that you need to exercise to be able to use the GSK8 APIs, which these you'll see are part of the IBMI software that gets installed. ACS software that gets installed. That you can view a list of certificates, and we got a picture of what that looks like over on the right. And then if you want to see detailed information about a particular certificate. So you can see what's in there if you're not sure that you pushed a certificate from the ACS key management interface into the Windows application package certificate store. And so then the deployment summary here is use the reg file to restrict functions. Build a reg file for each combination of ACS functions that your users need. Install ACS on the desktop. Execute the reg file after the install. And then push that TLS certificate stores for either or both of the ACS Windows applications.
Yeah, and I think that kind of sums it up really nice. So, Janine, with that, do we have any questions out there?
Actually,
because we tried to leave time for them today. So.
Yes, we have some great questions. But before we kick off, we have had a couple of people who asked about the slide deck. So if you join late, the good news is you can grab that right now. So on the left side of your screen, go to Event Resources, click on that drop-down menu, select the slide deck, and you can download the deck right from the platform. I think everyone's going to want to take away a copy of those. And then while we do the Q&A, Amy, I'm going to go to this chart, additional resources, because these are live links. So you can actually click right on these, and it will open in a separate window and be available to you following the webinar. So let's get into the Q&A. The first question is, do I have to create a new certificate every 13 months, or can an existing certificate be updated at the end of 13 months?
So you do have to create a new certificate. So you can't change the validity dates of a certificate that has been created. When that certificate is created, it is signed and given a specific set of validity dates. So what you would do at the end or just before the end of that 13 months is you would do what is a renewal button in the DCM, or you would get a new certificate from your certificate authority and then import that. And this is where you would add that new certificate to your servers. So both certificates are in place. And then once the old certificate expired, you could remove the previous certificate.
Great, thank you. Can you secure iNavigator with SSL?
Absolutely. So we did not touch on that in this webinar, but you can Navigator for I. You can secure Navigator for I along with DCM and the web application server. So there are pretty detailed instructions out there from IBM about that, but I think we're going to have an upcoming webinar about that because the question's coming up more often. So
great. The users will not be able to adjust the reg file like when the config file is created. That's a question. So they won't be able to adjust the reg file when the config file is created?
Assuming that there's a group policy that's pushed out to the end users that restrict them from editing the registry.
Okay.
Assuming that's in place, then go ahead. I'm sorry.
Steve. No, I was going to move on, but I want to make sure.
Assuming that's in place, then yes, those restrictions will be instantiated for that desktop.
Perfect. How can I run ACS as administrator? How can I run ACS as administrator?
Okay, so you can look for the blue eye icon on your desktop and right mouse on that and say run as administrator. And that will put you into the mode where you can see the restrictions tab in the preferences section.
Great. Does Fortra offer professional services to help configure and deploy secure ACS?
Yes, we do.
Great. Can this be rolled out to a department at a time? Oh, to a department at a time, or does everyone need to be changed all at once? And then it says setting change of IBM forces all at once.
No, so this is one of the great things about IBMI is that you can do the slow roll process. So when you put that certificate onto the servers, it's just now allowing them to accept requests for secure communications. It'll still allow the unsecured communications to happen until you change the telnet server to only allow secure communications. So you can absolutely do this at a department at a time. You can start with your administrators in your most critical resources, right? Make sure that their credentials and that their sessions are protected, and then move throughout until you get to that tipping point where you can shut it down and then force the rest to be secured.
Great. How do you deploy an ACS configuration to multiple users?
I'm assuming that's on. I'm assuming that's multiple users on a desktop. And what we recommend to customers is to definitely deploy the software into that public directory. But for icons and those types of things, is leverage the public desktop so that you don't have to publish icons into every user's desktop.
And then certainly if they're talking about multiple desktops, that's where, and I'm going to speak a little out of my expertise, but this is where those Windows deployment tools that are out there, and there's a plethora of them, I am aware, would help you to be able to push those files out to your end users along with those reg entries that Steve talked about.
Great. Okay, so this one is, we're basically only using ACS within the IT department. One annoyance before we push out to all users, when using the ACS basic emulator, was that it asks if you want to save the session config every single time they exit. Do you know a way to bypass this question?
I'm going from memory here, but I seem to recall if you create the session for the user, or for a session definition, a hood file that defines that session, then unless the user is making a change inside the session itself, it shouldn't prompt them to save it when they close it.
Yeah, I know when I'm using the session manager and I'm just opening the sessions from the drop-down list, if I don't do that save at least once, I get prompted every time. So if you've created the icon in the hood file, then they're not going to get prompted because they're going to go to that same hood file, which is the new, what was the old one, Steve? WCST? No.
WCS, I think it was.
Yeah.
Man, that's
so the hood files
that's
replace
too many
the old
moons ago.
emulator. I know. It's been too long. But yeah, I think if you do that one-time save, you're not going to get prompted anymore.
Great. I'm sure Kevin thanks you. Okay, the next question is, where can we find a mapping of the server-side functional authorities security controls as they pertain to the client-side .reg file restrictions to establish a multi-layered security approach to ACS functions?
So I think, Steve, they're referring to the old application administration that's now the functional. They like unified the name.
Usage. Function
usage. Thank you. So this doesn't exist. So there are some that will map to ACS, but at 7.5 they have trimmed down the function usage to a very few items now. So really the strength is using that reg file and then using exit points to provide that additional layer, which we'll talk about before we're out today. But yeah, right now, when I spoke to Wayne Bowers at Common a few weeks ago, I asked this very question, and they're looking at it, but right now there really is no one-for-one yet between the function usage and the functions in ACS.
Great. Okay, here's a PSA. There are tons of live ACS and other links in IBMI Reference Pages blog at ibmireference.blogspot. Okay, given that certs might expire frequently, how can the renew cert process be done programmatically?
It's a great question, and we are actually looking into that right now, if there's a way that we can help customers be able to automate that somewhat rather than having to go into however many systems they have. Because certainly if you have one or two systems, it might not be that overwhelming. When you're upwards of 30 to 100 LPARs, which we have a lot of IBM installations out there that are fairly large, that can be a daunting task every 13 months. It's going to take you 13 months just to keep up on your renewals. So it's something we're looking at, but there's nothing that we have found so far, unless, Steve, I missed something in the last week, that'll help you do this. Yeah.
No, I'm not aware of anything, unless you want to code your own using APIs.
That's
would
what
work.
I think we're looking into, yeah, is being able to create something. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so stay tuned. So Steve, this one is, what files do you change on the download zip, and is that configuration then deployed to anyone that installs that package? Then the second part is, also under general preferences, it shows the system for checking updates. Where would you put the deployment package on that system? So they install the configured package. It's kind of a two-parter. Do you need me to repeat that first part?
No, I'm actually reading it here.
Great.
So by using the registry keys to manage the functions that are available to the user, the actual install content of the product doesn't have to be manipulated, because the registry keys are controlling that the functions that are available to users. So that simplifies the management on the desktop of the product. Where would I put the deployment package on that system? I'm not sure if that's an IBMI or if that's for the system itself. But most of our customers, they choose to push the update to the desktops. And that way there's not 5 versions sitting out on desktops to be supported. And if you're interested in how to do that, you can reach out to us, and we'll be happy to discuss that with you. There's just some tips and techniques to make the process streamlined for your desktop engineers or whomever's managing the push of the application to the desktop.
Great. Okay, so someone too asking about, will a recording be available? So I just want to let everyone know, watch for our follow-up email. It will contain a link to the recording of today's presentation, and you can forward that to your colleagues, leadership, to view on demand as well. And with that, wow, great Q&A session. I'll turn it back over to you for some closing comments, Amy.
Absolutely. So just to wrap up, answer a few questions. One of the things that we want to encourage everybody to do is to know where your system's at. Understand what your security posture is. So you can use our free security scan, with no obligation. You don't have to talk to us if you don't want to. If you do, that's great. We love having these conversations. But it'll scan your IBMI and it gives you an idea of kind of where your security posture is. And then someone asked earlier if we offer services for these things. We do. We've got our managed security services. Steve, muscle memory, he is the single sign-on guru. So he does a lot of our single sign-on managed services to help you get there. And we also offer penetration testing, architecture discussions about your security posture, along with remediation services. So any of your IBMI security type projects that you've got, if you want assistance or guidance, don't hesitate to reach out to us. It really is what Steve and I get the most excited about, I think. And then Fortra's grown over the years, but really we still have a focus on IBMI, and we have a wide breadth of security products that can answer those challenges that you might have on your IBMI. So all the way from the assessments and working with your auditors to actually doing that monitoring and ensuring that the security policies and the settings that you've put in place are being maintained and staying there. So don't forget about, not just encrypting your sessions that we talked about today, but encrypting your data that is in place. And then identity management, virus protection. We talked about insider threats. Ransomware is real, and whether we like it or not, it does affect IBMIs. So don't ignore your IBMI when you're talking about the bigger picture. And with that, Janine, I want to thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Amy.
Thank you.
And Steve. So while I basically do our tech channel thank you, I'm going to come back for this free security scan. That's a live link. So go ahead and click on it as we conclude it. It'll open in a separate window again and be available to you following the webinar if you're interested in that. And basically, I just wanted to thank everybody, and thanks for your participation in the Q&A. What a fabulous session. Thank you, Steve and Amy, for sharing your expertise with us today. So later this week, watch for that follow-up email I was telling you about with the link to the recording, and get all the latest on all things tech by going to techchannel.com/subscribe. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.